Flight attendants and pilots of Reddit. What are some things that happen mid-flight that only the crew are aware of? A lady who was feeling very ill crapped her pants mid-flight. A very kind flight attendant managed to get her covered in a blanket and into the bathroom, with barely anyone noticing, and then gave her a pair of her own pants to wear so she wouldn't be embarrassed. I've got an original one for you all. There is a radio frequency we all are required to monitor. It's called GUARD. It's for emergency use and is designed for maydays, and for air traffic control to reach aircraft that may have lost radio contact, or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft and more. Every day this frequency is abused. You will hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing, yelling obscenities at each other, and making fun of one airline or another. Oftentimes what will start it is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers on the GUARD frequency, followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5-10 minutes. It's the worst on the East Coast. Edit. Just today I heard an airline aircraft trying to relay info about a medical emergency on this frequency through one of their fellow company aircraft. They couldn't finish any of their sentences without people yelling "Yeah on GUARD, hey nobody cares about yeah passenger, hey you're on GUARD 2A. Pilot here. We only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback has commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies, or control for other than US locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal, dodging weather, and probably bitching about scheduling. As said before in the last thread, there is a large list of things that can be broken, but the aircraft can still fly. Often, there will be a dead body in the cargo hold. There is a crash axe just laying around in the cabin. It'll split open your skull. Not tested, but it won't actually get through the aircraft skin or windows. Tested. Lavatory doors can be opened from the outside by lifting the metal plate saying lavatory, and pulling the pin under it. Both pilots may not eat the same meal, but they might be eating at the same time while the plane flies itself. An instructor told me that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 45 minutes at the same time, while gaining hours for licensing. The plane was in complete autopilot mode. Clear skies. Zero turbulence. They both swore if they ever flew again they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls. Edit. For further context, he told me that after both of them awoke, they were fucking terrified. Neither had no idea what had happened, even if anything had happened. Luckily, it was over the Gulf of Mexico and at a low enough altitude where it wouldn't impact commercial airliners. Their trim was set before the nap, so they only gained a couple hundred feet of altitude. But rest assured, each were not happy with themselves. They immediately contacted ATC, verified their position, and turned around to go back to the airport, white palming the yoke the entire way. Oh, and this was at night too. They needed the night experience. Edit 2. They were in a Cessna 152. This wasn't an oxygen issue. It was just two buddies not communicating with each other and both assuming the other was flying. Edit 3. You're right. C-152s don't have autopilot. By autopilot I meant trim, which would confuse people. They were also very lucky the trim was set to gain altitude, not lower. I was just speaking in layman terms for the non-pilots to understand better. Like I said, they were definitely thoroughly freaked out and both admitted how badly they fucked up. A former teacher told us a story that fits the question. Every year he would make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walks up to him and asks if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently, on the flight, he stopped the flight attendant and asked her to have sex with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times through the flight. It reached a point to where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with a relative he had never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. Pilot here. Most of the time the passengers are not given the full answer on why a flight is delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events, weather, instead of mechanical issues, so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms, meals, etc. Also, chemtrails are not real. For those of you who believe they are real, give your head a shake. 1 split second of instinct combined with piloting skill decides if you land on the runway or on the side of it. Most of the runways are 45 meters wide, and on a gusty summer afternoon or during thunderstorms, I take God's name more than Pope himself too. A smooth landing is not necessarily a good landing. One can make a smooth landing and it will feel good for passengers, but it could be a risky landing if the pilot decides to use extra runway. Never shout at your pilot for a bad landing unless he crash lands. And if he crash lands and you can shout at him, understand that you are alive because of him, as you Justice said. Better thump it onto the touchdown zone than grease it on 2/3 of the way down the runway. Bonus fact. Many a times aircrafts coming into land go back up in the air. This is a scary experience for many, as engines, after being relatively quiet for a while, roar back to life and aircraft is pulled back up. This is called a go-around. This happens because either the runway is not clear, weather is something that can't be negotiated properly for landing, or the pilot is not at the right place and right configuration. Go around is something that is emphasized by all the senior trainers and authorities, as it is better to go back up in the air than to be in a precarious position while forcing into land. So whenever your pilot does a go around, be happy that he is a safe pilot. Ex-airline employee here. Often we'd have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature in one end of the cabin hotter, and it localized the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging anywhere, it's because someone smells like open ass somewhere on the plane. Flight attendants often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat he's in. Pilots fuck around a lot up front. They'll take pictures, post on FB, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on long flights. Edit. Not really on topic, but don't ever walk barefoot or in socks on an airplane. The same mop that mops the lab, mops the galley. Not an airline pilot yet. Just got hired by my first airline and start class next month. But I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airline pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations in business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises is 100% true. Also, whenever someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they yell "see ya" and then a dozen other pilots will key up yelling "see ya" one after another. We also enjoy talking shit about people who say "with you." Got M on the fish finder. Any traffic please advise. And 3 and 5. Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a shit about turbulence or having to do a go around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about. Thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, etc. We sat in a backed up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in. Nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA holding up a 2-foot long piece of metal he had pulled from one of the tires. He explained if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting he might have never spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff roll and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel, or whatever. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. To this day I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. To make you less pissed about the delay. Not a flight attendant or a pilot, but I discovered there is such a thing as airhead when I saw one of the flight attendants giving a blowjob to one of the pilots mid-flight. Now, the thing to keep in mind was this was before 9/11, when the cockpit wasn't kept so securely locked. There was a bit of a bug spreading around the plane, which I was asked to take care of since I was the only doctor on board. I made my way to the cockpit to inform the pilot of the condition of the passengers, and as soon as I opened the door, I see the flight attendant bent over with her head in the pilot's lap. I could not believe what I was seeing, but I managed to snag a quick photo of it. This started off with us blissfully unaware, ended with mild pant shitting. I was flying to France in one of those planes with the TV screen up front to show the flight path and where you currently are. I was just about to fall asleep when the captain asked over the PA if there was a doctor on board and if they could go to seat whatever. I knew this was bad. The flight path changed to Canada and we had to make an emergency landing. We were stuck there for 2 hours. When we finally got to France, his entire row was quarantined off. I have no idea what the fuck happened.